the victory lap.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Jim.
Hi, George. How are you?
Good, thank you. We're standing by as people begin to join us in a couple of minutes. So,
Great.
quick questions before we start.
Yeah, I just want to first I want to say hello to Lawrence and Mary and Artist and Ray and Jared and Eric and Brandon. Ray, if you don't mind, is it Leonardini? Is that how you say it?
That's exactly right. You go to the head of the class.
That's my Italian background. So
Good. Yeah.
And do people mind if I call them by their first names?
Not at all. Thank you.
Okay,
It's
Nice to
fine.
meet you.
thank you.
You
Nice
can
to
call
meet
me
you, Mary.
Reverend Monsignor.
Yeah, right. I love the film. It was so beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's so beautiful. Now, George, do you have a sense of, I always like to ask this, who the audience is on this? Are these people who kind of know about prison ministry, or what would you say?
Yeah, I would say the majority of people know about it or are interested in it or are doing it.
Okay.
And as I understand, we have about 1,000 people.
It's amazing.
So, Jared, I think what we're doing is he's playing the PowerPoint slides here, and it says once they stop, then I'll begin.
Okay. So I think people are here, so I should probably stop talking.
They'll be joining us soon.
George, can I ask something?
Yes.
Are we expecting Paul Dietering?
I'm not sure yet. Hopefully.
Okay, thanks.
Father Jim, he
Yeah.
is probably going to call me on his phone and be on speaker.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Good evening, everyone, and good afternoon to those of us on the West Coast. I'm Father George Williams with the Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition, and I welcome you all to our program tonight, which we are doing in collaboration with the Prison Contemplative Fellowship. We're going to be showing you a premiere screening of a short documentary film called Holding Still, which is about centering prayer at Old Folsom Prison with my former colleague from the California Department of Corrections, Ray Leonardini. And so it's great to see Ray. And also our panelists will be some guys you'll see in the film that will Paul Dietering, Lawrence Hamilton, and Artis Knox. So welcome to you and thank you for being with us. Mary Trunk, who is the director of the film. She's a professor at the film department at Mount St. Mary's University, is with us as well. And Jim Martin will be moderating the panel after we view the film. So I just want to point out that Old Folsom Prison is the second oldest prison in California after San Quentin, where I used to work. It's a wonderful film. It's very moving. And to put ourselves in the right frame of mind to watch this film, I invite all of us to take a moment and pray. And as you may know, Maximilian Kolbe, there's an image of him, is really one of the patron saints of prisoners and prison chaplains. He gave his life freely for a stranger at Auschwitz and died a martyr. And this is a prayer that's attributed to him. So let's take a moment and pray for his intercession and for all those who are involved in our criminal justice system. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Saint Maximilian Kolbe, we ask for your intercession. Introduce me to Mary, the Mother of God, for she prayed for Jesus, her son, in a Jerusalem jail. She prayed for you in a Nazi concentration camp. Ask her to comfort me in my confinement. If I am lonely, may she say, God is here. If I feel hate, may she say, God is love. If I am tempted, may she say, God is pure. If I sin, may she say, God is mercy. If I am in darkness, may she say, God is light. If I am unjustly condemned, may she say, God is truth. If I have pain in soul or body, may she say, God is peace. If I lose hope, may she say, God is with you all days, and so am I. As we proceed, we pray for all the people involved in the production of this film, all those who are incarcerated at Old Folsom and all the prisons throughout our country. And may this experience of this film and the work that Ray and these men and women are doing inspire all of us to continue in this important work of prison ministry. So now we're going to watch the premiere of Holding Still.
For the majority of my life, I ran away from my feelings. I learned as a little kid, early on, since the age of 10 years old, every time I felt hurt, every time I felt any type of way, I would hit myself in the face. And I would say things like, "You better stop, you stupid bitch." And I would stop. I wouldn't feel anything.
Whoever the meanest dude was that was getting out of prison at the time, that was gonna come into my mother's life and control the flow of narcotics, that's who the boss was at Mom's house. Dangerous things going on that the next day when you go to school and all the rest of the kids are talking about like Bart Simpson and like the door got kicked in and you got tied up with phone cords last night and people were there to steal dope and money, but you can't say that to the kids that are talking about Bart Simpson, right?
I was physically abused and sexually abused as a kid, and I never told anybody.
Going through that as a kid, when you just have people let you down, especially when you try to express to them a situation and they don't get it or they take it serious or whatever. But the way to express that was not to express it, but just go through living life violently. That's what it was.
You know, certain type of people see that in you. It's an opportunity for them. It's a weakness.
You know, everybody on my mom's side of the family would talk garbage about him in front of me. You know, call him a loser, a deadbeat, he's no good. And they would use a lot of cuss words when they said it. And then every time I got in trouble, they'd tell me I was just like my dad. So all those things coupled together, yeah, I feel shame. Not only for the things that happened to me, but for things that I've done as well.
The fact that I haven't seen my son, who I had custody of since he was born. And at 6 years old, I had to leave him and go to prison because of my bad decisions. And here I am giving him trauma. I passed on the trauma.
Shame actually was rage. How could you make me do something like that? All those feelings, all they did was harm me.
Oh, man.
How you doing, bro?
Good, bro. Oh, man. When I saw Lawrence and Paul, woo, we met in the circle. We met in the silence. I was at Folsom State Prison, and they had just let us off of Fish Row, and I just ran out to the yard. It was like overwhelming because you saw all these inmates, people working out, people arguing, people playing dominoes. Then I saw this trail of like 5 white people walking in a single file line, like moseying through. And they go to the Greystone Chapel, the church. I'm like, what's going on? And I was curious, so I walk into the chapel, and the inmates, the men are setting up chairs in a circle. And then I look at the yard, it's chaos. I look inside of the chapel, it's peace and like this ritual and serenity. I look outside at the yard, and I look in the chapel, and I say, okay, this is where I want to be.
Let's do it. Let's close our eyes when we're ready. Take a deep breath. Feel our feet flat on the floor. Let the air go out slowly.
Okay, this is the way the practice is supposed to work. Sit in a comfortable position, just letting thoughts go in your mind, and you're not paying attention. Well, I mean, the thoughts are trying to get your attention, but your thing is to just listen to God. So God is the silence in between the thoughts.
My first experience doing centering prayer was not the greatest. I thought I had to like turn my mind off where I had no thoughts at all. And I just found it frustrating that I couldn't do that. And so I thought I was doing it wrong.
The thoughts are always taking you away. So while you're sitting there, the thought is, you're sitting there and you're like this, and the thought is taking you to thought. You know, it might be a terrible thought, like something that happened to you when you were a child, or something that happened to somebody that you love. But as you just sit there, you know, pretty soon you're able to not react physically or mentally or emotionally. So the story is just going. So as the story takes you away, grabs you, whatever, anger, whatever, resentment, whatever. But in between that thought and the next thought, there's silence. And in that silence, you can kind of hear God's voice. I mean, it's magical for me because it's God healing you, but in his own language. And God's language for me is silence, but it's a silence that really says something to you.
After the silence, after we sit for a number of minutes, Ray introduces a subject, and then it will activate something within someone in the group, and then we'll start dialoguing.
We'll have a topic, shame or guilt or love or forgiveness.
That day, he was speaking about shame, and it really struck me because I've done a lot of self-reflection. I've done a lot of groups in prison, self-help groups in prison, and this is a topic that we don't speak about more. We go around shame. We talk a lot about the actions, but we don't talk about why. And I really sat there and I listened to him about shame and the emotions of shame and how it affects our life. And it was the first time I heard it, and I wanted more. I wanted more, and I just kept coming.
What's the most difficult topic? I think the most difficult topic for all of us is toxic shame. Not only did you do something bad, but you are bad. You know, you're just a bad person.
It's dark. It's very, very, very painful. I've sat calling myself meditating and tears just running down my face because of not only what I felt towards myself, but the harm I've done to others. Yeah. Because I didn't know how to deal with what was going on within me.
I started seeing the childhood traumas that I didn't even realize were there in the first place. And so that was kind of like scary, like Josh was saying, it's scary because it's like, man, what do I do with this?
Mom and Dad are arguing. There they are in the living room arguing. And so I was scared to death. I still remember that fear. And I remember that fear every time something comes up. I hate violence. I can't stand violence. And I became violent. It continued to fester and fester and fester because I didn't know how to address it. I didn't know how to be who I was supposed to be.
And I start trying to build a callus over that, over those emotions, start trying to use anger, hatred as a way to control my own emotional content. What I realized after years and years of wrestling with those tears, those uncontrollable tears, it's just grief. I never allowed myself to experience the grief of domestic violence or the grief of, familial suicide or You know, you do things to people that haunt you. Decades later, you start to feel like, you know, I've forfeited my own soul, some of the stuff I've done to people. So I know what it's like to run away from that grief, run away from those emotions. I just don't want to live like that anymore.
This experience within the meditation, and honestly, most of the time it's like I'm getting attached to every thought, and it's dragging me down this rabbit hole. I never felt like I'm any good at this. I'm sitting through it so I can participate in the conversation. I don't know when things kind of shifted. I did have one experience of like just feeling like a tenderness. Every day you're doing push-ups and this so that you can be like tough, so nothing can get to you. You know, the state of California tried force for 20 years and it didn't work. But like that tenderness, that feeling like saying you're okay, man. You're all right. You're not. You're not that bad a guy, man. Even if he done some bad stuff, and look, everybody in that circle, like, shit, everybody in the world needs to feel a little bit of that, man.
It was entering into the silence and analyzing these feelings of rejection, of fear, of hurt, of feeling lonely, of feeling afraid, of feeling violated, of feeling not good enough, not tough enough, not masculine enough. But it was about after 6 months of sitting and centering prayer and hearing these guys talk about their pain and their shame and why they actually are afraid and angry and why they committed their crimes.
I had just about the worst role models that you could have. Like when I look in my toolbox, man, I got one tool, and that's to not feel vulnerable because I'm being aggressive. And so now you're on defense and you're vulnerable, and now I don't feel like I don't feel weak. If that's the only tool you got, you learn to use it pretty good, but it's not adequate.
In the past, I was never able to look within myself. Never, because I was always afraid of the way I felt about it when I would do it. And I recognize now why I was so bitter and so angry at the whole world and everybody else, because I would hold all these things in, and any little thing would trigger me to act either violently, turn me to drugs, or any kind of criminal behavior.
Because we all came to prison because we acted out of the fear, of the shame. So we're all suffering from the same condition. We're trying to escape ourselves.
My thoughts would tell me all kind of crazy things about life, about what someone did, about the past, about me wanting revenge, about what I need to do to make things right. And that's what's so liberating about centering prayer and learning how to sit still with yourself, is that you have a space now where you could look at your thoughts and say, what the fuck am I thinking? What the fuck is that? Nah, that's not right. And it leads you to better decisions.
As you can be over here with all the nonsense, or you can be over here as a man with other men who decide to change their lives and move forward in life.
I tried numerous of things, try to deal with this pain. But when I came to this class right here and spoke about it, it healed me.
I love myself for who I am today, and making peace with myself, I think that it helps me make peace with other people.
Now I feel that sense of calmness. There's this sense of
weight lifted off my shoulders.
I'm probably, with the exception of being in prison, the happiest I've ever been.
Each and every one of these guys in here is going through a struggle that I thought that I was the only one that was going through it. It just like opened my eyes, as in, you're not alone.
There is such a monumental relief, and there is such a freedom in it. And it's not a magic wand, it's not a silver bullet, it's not a shot of whiskey, it's not something that you realize or understand or grab onto right away. It's a process, but the results are very, very real, and they're not an accident. You know, there used to be this old ad on TV, and the catch line was, "The mind is a terrible thing to waste." Well, in my case, you could drop the last two words. You know, mind is just a terrible thing. It's like one horrible memory after another horrible memory. And then by doing this process, I finally realized, you know what? Those thoughts aren't me. That's the junk that I've picked up over the decades, and I can let that stuff go. And I can start putting that stuff in its rightful place. And I can start tapping into much more important things like faith, hope, love, joy, courage, wisdom. You know, they're all in there, and it's funny, they all have their own language, and their first language is silence. And that's just the craziest thing. That would have never occurred to me prior to tapping into this thing.
You really don't have to be mad. You don't have to be sad. You know, I mean, that's the normal reaction, but you get a chance to choose your own reaction. But as you're sitting there in silence, and the silence is healing all of that, the stuff that would just make you, that would turn you and twist you, it doesn't turn you and twist you anymore. And then you can, I guess, make a conscious choice of how you want to respond. Just by having access to this practice, we get to tune into something that's not judgmental. You know, a lot of people that have been through what we've been through, and they haven't had the benefit of this center prayer. They're still walking around feeling guilty. And here we are coming out of prison probably with some of us have some pretty serious offenses. But we're not looking down on ourselves, and we're not looking down on other people in our position. We're not looking down on anybody that's going through anything, because we're realizing that circumstances had molded that behavior, but it molded that behavior while we were asleep. But now we're back awake, but we're not driven by, like we were saying, that false self, something, the ego that wants to prove something, that wants to, we just want to experience the joy of living. And just by having that intention, our life turns beautiful. What do you call that thing, a paradigm shift? Where you think the whole world is against you, and now the whole world seems interactive everywhere I go, but all I see is like goodness and people enjoying life. And before, my life was based on how much what I had, material shit, you know, cars, clothes, females, all this. And that stuff is not important. What's important is the relationships. Man, you don't know. Then again, you do know how good it feels to sit here with you guys, man, and know what we've been through, man, and know that, you know, you brought this light to us, and now we're basking in this light. It's almost like a person with the miracle cure, and he's trying to promote it. Look, all you have to do is this, and everybody's looking at you. No, it can't be that simple, you know, but it is.
You know, Lawrence, that dude has a way of summing things up in such a profound way. Yeah, that's it. It does make you feel like you're gonna be okay.
That's how I felt about Polly, because it's like a lifelong friend. We built such a bond, you know, like in centering prayer. We built such a bond in the yard and in the youth diversion that it's indescribable, because you go through things in prison that people out here don't understand. You go through the depression, you go through the anxieties, the bitterness, and it's only what they can understand. And so when you see someone out here that has walked in your shoes, we say, wow, you know, he's made it too. He's gonna be okay, I'm gonna be okay. And we're all doing okay.
Wow. Thank you so much for that beautiful film. It reminds me of why I love prison ministry so much, to see what these men are sharing, just the triumph of the spirit, the human spirit over so many obstacles and so many difficulties. So thank you. We're so blessed tonight to have a couple of these men you've seen in the film here with us as panelists. And also Father James Martin is going to be facilitating the panel discussion tonight. Now, Jim knows a thing or two about prayer. He is the author of the recently best-selling book, Learning to Pray, A Guide for Everyone. And I can vouch for Jim's knowledge of prayer. We were together in the novitiate. And so he's going to be leading the conversation. If you have any comments, those of you who are visiting us remotely, please write your questions or comments in the chat box, chat feature on your, and then we can relay those questions to the panel. We have with us Lawrence Hamilton, who you just saw in the film, and Artis Knox, and I believe Paul Dietering will be joining us by phone. We're also honored to have Mary Trunk, who is the director of this wonderful film, and Ray Leonardi, who is the chaplain who works at Old Folsom Prison, who you also saw in the film. So Jim and panelists, welcome. Thank you for your sharing with us tonight.
Well, great to be with you. And thank you, George, for that introduction. Sorry, I ran away to turn my phone off. I'm just so happy to be with this group. I want to thank everyone who participated in the film, and Mary, especially as the filmmaker. I'd like to start off our conversation maybe with Artis and Lawrence and Paul. Is Paul available?
He is trying to get on Zoom, but I'm just going to call him. So,
okay.
there you go.
All right. Well, maybe we can start with Lawrence and Artis. Thanks for joining us. Were either of you in the initial group that was formed in 2008?
Oh, he's in.
Oh, there we go. Hello, Paul.
Yes.
Lawrence or Artis or Paul, were any of you, Lawrence, you were in the original group?
Well, you know, I came to Folsom in 2009, so I was like maybe a year after, but then I was a steady participant from that point on.
Well, then maybe I can ask you this question. What made you want to join a group like that? I mean, did you know much about centering prayer, and what was it that appealed to you?
I didn't know anything at all about centering prayer, but this is what got me. I went to a group one day, and Ray, for some reason, he said, you could build an intimate relationship with God. And I said, what? That's got to be, you know, something to look into. And, you know, I found it to be true. You can have an intimate relationship with God through this practice, man.
And how long would you say it took you to feel that way? I mean, how many sessions or how many weeks of centering prayer would that have taken for you to really feel like you had that relationship with God?
I think it's different for everybody, because for me, I was so peace hungry that I think just the idea of a relationship with God and sitting there contemplating that that's what it was going to be, I immediately fell into this peace, you know, and, you know, I had to realize that, you know what, this is just God blessing me, kind of hooking me, because after the peace, that's when the transformation starts taking place. That's when all the thought, you're sitting there and all the thoughts from the past, everything that's been done to you, everything, you know, the stories that your mind makes up. And the key is when you can finally just let those thoughts and emotions do what they do and just sit there the peace overwhelms the story, and the peace becomes more important than the story you're telling yourself. And in that peace, you find it's, I mean, I swear, I'm totally convinced that at the core of every single human being on this planet is a core of love. And, you know, we get disconnected. I think life is really just love going through changes, you know, and just hate is love going in the wrong direction. But when you can connect to that, then you lose the love is such a feeling, it's so overwhelming. You do not want to do anything to disconnect yourself from that love. And so then you start living your life from that perspective. You know, sometimes when we say love, it's like too hard of a word for people. You know, we were in prison, you could never, you know, we were so grateful for the volunteers for coming in there. You always want to say, man, I love you guys. But you couldn't say that because, I don't know, it was over familiarity or whatever. So what I said, I changed it to, you know what? I have an unconditional positive regard. That means my regard for you is not based on any type of conditions whatsoever. I've just got to, I might not like what you're doing, I might not, you know, but for you, because I know that what that core is inside of you, and I know that your life is just love going through changes, I can have that unconditional positive regard.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I especially like the idea of, I wish I had talked to you before I wrote my book on prayer, the idea of peace as a real sign of God's presence. Artist, can I ask you a question? Yes. Did other people at Folsom notice a difference in you, say before and after you started centering prayer? And then did you also notice a difference in yourself? Like, first of all, did people outside say you seem different?
You know, it was interesting because I was raised in a Christian home. My grandmother was a minister. My mother was a minister. My granddad was a deacon for over 50 years. So I grew up in a very religious setting, and it was some mistakes that led me to prison. But one of the things that caused me to gravitate towards the practice and for people to see the light was that when I saw Ray and Susan and Al coming down the yard, it felt so familiar. It felt like I knew these individuals. And when I got in the group, I felt that same familial love and concern, or like Lawrence called a unconditional positive regard for these individuals. And then I realized this is the same feeling I got in my grandmother's kitchen when she would pray for me and tell me about the Bible and tell me about God and how much God loved me and the plans for my life and what I could do if I just open up and allow God's love to heal me. And then you realize all these individuals coming from these different places of spiritual influence are saying the same thing, to open up and to allow God's love to flow through you so that you can give it to someone else. So people did see the change and people experienced the change. And I remember I had people asking me to be my bunkie because they wanted to be with someone who would bring them some peace and not give them trouble. So I had a waiting list of people who wanted to be my bunkie because they saw the light, but I couldn't claim for the light. I was just a conduit for the light. And centering prayer, contemplative prayer, helped me to tune that.
So almost like it was bringing you back to who you had been, right? Or kind of your original self.
And when you say original self, James, it goes back to what Ray teaches about the prodigal son. We hit on the prodigal son so many times, and Father Keating's writing on the prodigal son and how the prodigal son was at home, or the parallel between being right in the presence of God when we're born, we're pure, we're that essence, we're what God created us to be. And somewhere along the way, we lose our way, we go down the path, but then we remember our Father's house. We remember that place. And for me, I was that prodigal son because then I remembered who I was and what I had, and all I had to do was come back home.
Yeah, and one of the great things about the prodigal son that I like is the prodigal son wants to say he's sorry, but even before the words are out of his mouth, the father greets him. It's such a, you're talking about your grandmother. It's such a great image of God. You know, it's such a great image of God's welcome. Paul, can I ask you a question? Can you hear us okay?
You're muted, Paul.
You're muted, yeah. Okay.
There we go. Yeah, we got you perfectly. Paul, one thing I wanted to ask you, because the film didn't go into this in kind of detail. For someone who might have watched the film, it's obviously talking about centering prayer and the effects of centering prayer. Can you give someone a very brief description if they said to you, what is centering prayer and how do you do it? Like maybe step by step to help some of the viewers?
Okay, there are probably people that are going to be better at this than me, but I'll give it a shot here. I like the term resting in God. And in some of the literature, I've come across that term. And it's just a practice of not becoming attached to one's thoughts, of taking a position of receptivity, or you're receptive to God. So you are emptying yourself out of these thoughts, of this clutter, this narrative that drags us along for most of our week, and we're giving ourselves 20 minutes to just rest and allow God to communicate to us, or to just be present to us.
And let me ask you, I think probably a common question that many people have is, what happens when you get distracted? I mean, there must have been so many distractions in Folsom, and also, you know, just distractions in our interior life. What happens when distractions come up in centering prayer?
I think it's a misconception that people are going to be able to control their thoughts, and that discourages people if they don't understand that distractions are going to come up. And oftentimes we'll use a sacred word, or people will focus on their breathing just to be a symbol of their intention to be in the presence of God, right? To be receptive. Yeah, I think that's
all right. Thank you. And do you still continue the practice of centering prayer?
I do, not as often as I'd like to, Father. But I noticed that when I don't, it's difficult to describe, but there's a sort of emotional or spiritual, like, irritation that one begins to feel. And I know that I need to give myself that time.
Well, and just to make you feel good, since I talk a lot about prayer with people, pretty much everyone says I don't pray as much as I would like to. So we're all in the same boat. Mary, let me ask you a question. First of all, congratulations on that beautiful film. Do you know many centering prayer programs for women in various prisons, or?
You know, I don't. Ray was the person who introduced me to this group and these wonderful men. And yes, I would love to find out about groups for all kinds of people, because obviously it's something that can help everyone. So there's thoughts about looking into that. We still need to plan it and raise some money. But,
and let's talk. Okay, that's great. And let's talk a little bit about the film itself. Again, congratulations. How did it? Can you tell me how it came about? People will want to know how you came onto this topic and how you got access to the prison. And
well, I'm a professor at Mount St. Mary's University, and I've been working on a project with the CSJs, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, an oral history project. And they, someone saw the work and wanted to do a project about social justice, people who worked in social justice. And I met Ray, who was interviewed, and I had a chat with him, and he told me about what he does. And I was completely intrigued. He was so articulate about what he does and what he wants to do, and passionate and sincere. And he said he wanted to make a film about this. And the one thing that I thought was so interesting is he tried to make a film and it never happened. So he gave all the money back. And I thought, who does that? I said, you get that money back and I'll help you. But really it's meeting all these other people that are part of the film, and that convinced me that they have an incredible message, incredible stories, and compassion, and they're compelling. And I felt like I could emotionally relate to them. And that's important for me when I'm making a film.
Well, speaking of which, as a filmmaker, how is this different from other projects you've worked on?
I would say that it's really more collaborative. There's really a team of people, and that includes the people in it. I feel like I do have a responsibility to my subjects, but I think in this case, they're the guides. they're the ones that are really wanted to get this out there. And I'm just grateful they trusted me to do that. And we worked together. I have skills, they have skills. We came together to do that. And so that's a little different. And the fact that I relate to it emotionally, I mean, I do understand shame in my own way. So that was a real compelling thing for me. Most of my other projects have been more about the creative process and more personal stories. So this is personal in a different way. Yeah.
And can you tell us your hopes for the film, where you hope it will play and who you hope will see it?
Sure. Well, I do want to quote something that Ray, I read in one of Ray's books that I think kind of speaks to that a little bit. And he says, you know, we're all prisoners in one form or another, and some of us are behind bars. And I think that it's really for everyone. Because like I said, I have not been in prison, but I understand shame and what that can do to you and how you have to learn how to cope with it. But I also think it's a film for people who want to do this and maybe can now feel like they can try it. And these people, they had the courage to explain their transformation and tell these intimate, vulnerable stories. So I'm hoping it gives other people courage to see them as the people they are and not faceless people. So, you know, it's prisoners and people who want to do this practice, and really anyone who wants to try out centering prayer, I think.
Well, that's great. Now, before obviously we're gonna talk to Ray, but I just want to let people know that we in the chat function we have a lot of questions already. So many questions. But Ray, you know, I always think beginnings are so interesting to people. How did this begin? And tell us a little bit about the history. There's a little bit about it in the film, but maybe give us just a little thumbnail sketch of how this began for you and how it grew into what it is today.
You know, I went out to Folsom basically to join a prayer group. And I had no idea what I was going to encounter. And over a period of time, I started realizing that, you know, people should hear these guys talking. They have a insight and courage that is really unique. And, you know, to me, it's the way I would summarize it. There is a spirituality of the incarcerated, and not enough has been written about it. But when you're with them as a volunteer or a facilitator, you begin to feel that there's an insight here that needs to be shared with the society at large, because clearly incarcerated folks are the castaways of our society. You know, a lot of people, you know, feel lock them up and throw away the key. They don't deserve anything. And, you know, more and more it occurred to me that these are precisely the sinners and tax collectors that Jesus hung out with in his day and seemed to get energy and insight from hanging out with them. And I started thinking, you know, this is starting to happen to me. These guys are really teaching me something they had no idea that they were. You know, they just have no idea. But the way in which they configure their experience and the way in which they can pull the divine into their experience is as Lawrence said in the film, is a magical thing. I never saw a prayer practice, and I've seen a lot of them, that is as deep and as transformative as centering prayer. And so, you know, I started, it was more of a fantasy. It wasn't even a dream, it was a fantasy. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do this? Well, over the years, I thought, you know, let's give it a shot. And when COVID came up and I couldn't go in and all that kind of stuff, I thought, well, this is the time we can try and do it. And fortunately, so many of these men that you see in the film were already released, so we could get access to them in a more comprehensive and complete way. Because part of the problem is you can't interview people when you go into prison, you know, ironically enough. But that's precisely what, you know, you need to meet Lawrence, you need to meet artists, you know, you need to meet Paul and really get to understand how they think for you to understand the dynamic that goes on. So.
Well, and I think one of the most powerful things about the film, and this is thanks to Mary and all the participants, is how we do feel we know, even in 20 minutes, because it's so deep and because people are sharing at such a deep level, which I think it takes a while to get to in other films, right? You feel like you really have an insight into people very quickly. Ray, I'd love to ask you, I'm going to do a little plug because Ray has written Finding God Within, which is a wonderful book, and Going Inside, which is another wonderful book among others. Can you talk a little bit about the books and how they're being used as well in different places?
Well, I'm sure you can appreciate this, Jim. I never thought of myself as an author. It just never occurred to me. But there was a time period, around 2010, 2011, where there was no Catholic chaplain at the prison, and I volunteered because there was nobody available. So each Sunday when I would reflect on scripture and that sort of stuff, I would write it out because, judging from my own attention span, I knew that, people would get maybe 10 or 20% of what I was saying and then be distracted. So I had all this accumulation of gospel stories, and I had a similar accumulation of things that I would pass out when I was teaching centering prayer. And a friend of mine, Scott Wood, said to me one day, he said, you want to write a book? And I said, you got to be kidding me. And so the long and short of it is that I wanted to write a book that was user friendly. I had been bringing books in to the prison with me, and a lot of them are, well-intended spiritual books with a lot of theology and written for a particular audience. Now, this audience in the prison, they know a lot, but it has to be communicated to them in a way that they would understand. And so I decided, well, let's let the prisoners do the teaching. So Lawrence is all over the book, Artist is all over the book, Paul is all over the book, interspersed with things that I would say. So it would give it kind of a reality and grounding about how centering prayer impacted people. And I think that's why it's unfortunately, it's about the only thing written that's going into prisons these days. And it's why it's so popular, because it meets them where they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're totally intimidated by talking about God. They feel that God left them behind, so many men. So when they hear other prisoners talking about God the way Lawrence and these guys do, it really gets their attention. So that's how the book came about. The second book, The Going Inside, is really a practical book about what you need to think about if you want to go inside.
I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No, that's it.
Let me ask you something. You touched on this very briefly, Ray. You said you were talking about people maybe, struggling with their concept of God. Do people have to be Christian to do this? Do they have to be believers to do this? Do you ever have people who are, agnostics or maybe even atheists that come to you? Well, what are people's, I don't say what do they have to be, but what's your experience with people's different religious backgrounds?
The vast majority have no speakable religious denominational preference. Mm-hmm. They're going around looking at various denominations, trying to find a way in, and they just don't have a way in because so many denominations really presume a relationship with the divine that they can function with, and it's just not true because of the guilt and the shame and so forth. They don't have a denominational preference. I would really love to hear the answer to that question from Paul and from the other guys.
Yeah, great.
Yes, Paul, what do you think?
I think that was part of what was so exciting about our group, is that we had guys from, African nature-based religions to guys who were Odinists, Buddhists. We always treated religion as sort of the language, the cultural language that you express your experience of the divine. But we were there to focus on what is your experience of the divine. And if you don't have one to speak of, if you'd like to sit with us here in the silence, you're welcome to join us, and nothing may happen, or something wonderful may happen. But I think that it was important that we allowed the space for people to have different religious traditions and nobody felt threatened. I think that was unique, and if we could duplicate that in coming groups and discussions, it makes me feel comfortable to have people from different perspectives.
Well, Paul, I think you make a really important distinction in the spiritual life, which is what we're told about God and the images we have of God, which may be from our childhood and maybe all about judging, and then God, right? Like our experience of God. And so Lawrence was talking at the beginning about peace, peace as, and I often say to people, you have this image of God, maybe it's the judge, the person who's like a taskmaster. In fact, I worked with a couple of people who said their image of God was like a parole officer. So that God is always waiting for you to do something versus, as you were saying, Paul, your actual experience of God, right? And so a person might have this image of God as the parole officer, but their experience of God is peace. And I always like to say to people, like, trust your experience like that. There's your God. And then there's God. Let me go to some of the questions. We have a ton of questions because we have about 500 people, so we won't get through them all. First of all, a comment to Lawrence, Artis, and Paul. You all have a lot of intestinal fortitude facing up to shame and all your prior stuff. You are really an inspiration for me. So that's a beautiful comment. So now this is from a woman named Beverly. I don't think she'll mind me saying her name, and maybe I'll address it to Artis. Did you receive much consternation and opposition from other inmates outside the centering prayer group? If so, how did you deal with that? And I'm guessing maybe she means kind of people maybe making fun of it or critiquing it. How did you get much of that, and how did you deal with it?
Wow, what a powerful question.
Yeah.
One of my experiences I remember vividly, Lawrence and I was standing outside the Great Stone Chapel, and I'm pretty sure you remember this, Lawrence. And we were waiting for Ray and the crew to arrive, and I would get any opportunity I could to just talk to Lawrence. I would ask him a question, and he would go into this. He has his nickname as the Philosopher King. He would go into this. Hampton named him the Philosopher King because he would go into this philosophical, explanation of whatever it was, and I just loved to hear him talk. So we were talking, and we were picking some white roses off of the bush, and I'm picking roses and putting them in my pocket because it's like the only rose bush on the yard, and it's right by the Greystone Chapel. And I'm gathering these roses to take them to my cell, and I had a handful of roses walking to the cell after the prayer group, and Lawrence had his roses. We go our separate way, and then some inmates start, laughing at me, and then the guard's like, "Hey, Arch, you taking it back to your cell for your boyfriend?" And I said, "Actually, I'm not." I said, "You go home, right?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, I go home too." I said, "When you go home, is your home beautiful?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, mine isn't. Mine is a concrete mausoleum." I said, "These flowers are the only thing that reminds me of nature and life on the outside." I said, "And it's all I have. So I'm not taking it to my boyfriend. I'm taking it to myself." And so everybody was just quiet, and they looked. And from that day on, they didn't make fun of me. But it was like this transition to where I became okay with it too. I was okay being the outside, being the weirdo, the guy walking on the yard with flowers. That's fine, because inside of me was a peace that surpassed all understanding. And I was totally okay with it.
Well, that's a great, Artis, we talked about your original self. Would you have been comfortable with that before you started centering prayer? Would you have been comfortable kind of being, different, as it were, and taking roses back to your room? Or would you have been more concerned about what other people thought of you?
Growing up, it was encouraged that I would be comfortable in my own skin. I was trained from a child to be a pastor. It was prophesied before I was born that I would be a pastor one day. So I was ushered into this spiritual experience from my grandmother and my mother from a very young age. But in prison, I had to hold that back because it caused me to appear what they call soft or, feminine, or someone who's not tough enough, not masculine enough. So I had to try and dial that back. And when I tried to dial it back, I ended up going to the hole 4 times. I broke my hand 4 times. I had all these issues and struggles, but it wasn't until centering prayer and the contemplative process that showed me that it's okay to be who you are. And the most powerful thing you could do is to allow God to rest in you and you to express him in the most pure form, which is love, patience, understanding, soundness of mind, and in any environment. Like for me, the Bible says that perfect love casts out all fear. And that love, that silence, that acceptance is what gave me the most powerful thing. And I tell people, if I could choose to have one superpower, I prefer two, but if I could have one superpower, it would be the power of love. If I could have two, it would be the power of prayer. And if you take prayer and love, that's like a nuclear bomb, and it will affect the world.
Well, Artist, thank you. Someone already said in the comments you should be a pastor, so they obviously can tell your background. Lawrence, someone wrote that they'd love to know a little bit about your centering prayer practice now and how it relates to the time of pandemic isolation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's kind of rough because even though it's like, you know the drill, but, just because you know the drill doesn't mean that you're not subject to all the things that, to come, the afflictive thoughts. But I'm kind of adjusting my practice because in prison, like the guards would walk like at 2 o'clock and, you hear the keys. And then like from like 2 to 4, you could just meditate. It's silence and peace. So I had gotten the habit of getting up early in the morning where I'm at and meditating like 45 minutes, but what I found is I probably need like maybe 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the afternoon just to break that up because, there's a lot of contrast going on in the world, and, just dealing with families and coming back and readjusting to society. But the biggest thing I got from my center and prayer practice is I actually don't believe all the bullshit that's going on in my head, So I look at it like my thoughts are just entertainment. And then I could put the spin on the thoughts, just like when B was talking at the beginning of the movie. What kind of thought is that? And it actually brings you back because that like I always say, that connection with love, you don't want to lose it. Once you get that connection, it's the most important thing in your life. You don't want to lose it. And that's what it's all about. Just that love and the peace. And the peace is just the beginning because the peace actually gives you the opportunity to make better choices instead of reacting before. It was like you push a button, you're going to get this real quick, but now, you can just sit back in peace and give a better response. And I'm always asking myself, is my response kind? Is my response compassionate? Is my response understanding? And most of all, is my response loving? And if it's not, I try to adjust it to be that.
Well, thank you. A lot of the comments are congratulating Mary for the beautiful film. So we see a lot of comments and thank yous. Mary, one question that came up is, how did this affect your own spiritual life? How did you spent a lot of time with these men and with this practice? How did it, if anything, how did it influence your own sort of spiritual life?
That is a very good question. Before I answer that, can I just say one thing? I just want to say a shout out to some of the other men who helped us with the film who are probably watching. And,
please.
Greg, thank you. Tyrone, Eddie Lee, B, who is amazing. Frankie, I don't know if you're here, and Ed Fry. So I hope you're all here and can say, and you're hearing me say how grateful I am. I am one of those people who does not have a particular faith, and but I would say that everything Lawrence has been saying, Lawrence, you're thank you. I'm just going to say, Lawrence, kindness, love. I'm with him. I believe in him. I believe in these people. So
amen to that.
That's really where it's at for me. It's people, loving people.
Thank you. That's great. Which is a spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm.
Ray, someone asked, interesting question. They asked a little bit about the beginnings, which we've talked about, but someone asked, what does it take to do this kind of ministry? Like what kind of, I'll just leave it at that. What does it take to do this kind of ministry?
There are a lot of things I could say, but I think the most honest thing I can say is it takes an awareness that I am in the same kind of pursuit as these men are, that I'm looking at the deepest part of my being and my psyche for the very same answers that they are looking for. So there was a solidarity and camaraderie that existed in every discussion I had, because it was a mutual search. reminds me, when I first started doing this stuff, a friend of mine went into death row at San Quentin, and he was talking about talking to the prisoners, and he said one guy really struck me. He said he's in a cell at death row, and it's got all this mesh, so you can't pass anything through. And this is a black man, and all you can see were the whites of his eyes and the whites of his teeth. And I was trying to communicate with him. And I said to him, what was the hardest thing? What's the hardest thing about being on death row? And he said to me, my friend said to me that without skipping a beat, he said, oh, the question is whether or not my life has any meaning. And that question or that comment penetrated me, because I thought, here, I'm a white middle-class guy, former lawyer, and that's the same question I have. So there's some kind of connection I felt with this man on death row that has taken me into, I take that with me every time I go into the prison. We are all searching for a deep, penetrating experience of the divine so that we can live a life that's meaningful and purposeful.
Thank you. Here's a really interesting, that's great. Thank you so much. I mean, and I hope it encourages people to do this kind of ministry as well as doing the centering prayer itself. Paul, we haven't heard from you in a while. I can ask you this question. First of all, it starts off, and there's also some nice, Mary, you are an amazing filmmaker, artist, you would be a great pastor. And so one of the comments is, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your courage in participating in this film. I'm blown away by your testimonies. And one question is, and I'll address this to you, Paul, do you think if you centered yourself in prayer earlier, that you would have ended up in Folsom?
I take it that question is, do I think that I would have ever been incarcerated to begin?
Yeah, I think that's what that means. Yeah.
That's hard to say. It's centering myself in prayer allowed me to really get to know myself on a deeper level. And it makes you more compassionate. All of the Beatitudes, I feel like those are the things that increase in who we are in our life and the way that we relate to other people. Other people recognize it in us. There's a positivity that I have now that I never had before. So I can't say definitely that I never would have, but I can say that the benefits of this practice for me have just been amazing. And I'm fortunate to have had so many guys come with me to the group to check it out. And maybe it was because they noticed something about me that was changing. I hope so. But yeah, it was a real honor.
Well, by the way, as you were talking, I noticed a compliment to you. Paul, I'm so impressed. I'm reading now. I'm so impressed and moved by your description of centering prayer. You spoke from your heart and soul and defined it beautifully, as good as any expert. So there's a nice reflection.
Father, briefly, you asked me a question earlier about the distractions.
Yep.
And Father Keating says something beautiful, that if you're distracted 1,000 times, that's 1,000 blessings, 1,000 opportunities to center yourself back on your intention to connect with God. So yeah, we can't judge them as negative, those distractions.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's no person who does not pray with distractions. And one of the prayers I like to teach people is, if they can't let go of every distraction, and we can't, to say to God, God, I'm distracted and I'm with you. And I think, God can deal with that. God can deal with us as distracted people. Here's one. This question is for Lawrence. Thank you for your presence here tonight and for your story. You said in the video that silence is the language of God, and that this silence paradoxically says something to you about who you are. How exactly did silence speak to you, and what did it say about who you are?
Like a difficult question because with me understanding that God's language is silence, I can't translate it, into, I can use words for a description, but it's something about the presence of that spirit, the presence. It just does something so miraculous you know, and I mean, I swear, I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm on a Pollyanna soapbox or whatever, but I feel like, man, something like this could change the whole world. Could you imagine what the world would be like if everybody was centered on that real spirit that they have? You know, I mean, they could still pursue material wealth and they could still pursue, but just to actually be grounded in that spirit, you know, and know that everyone else is the same as you. You know, I mean, there's been so much separation, you know, separated politics, racial or whatever. But when you actually realize that, you know what, it's really just one life being expressed through God is all in all. And he's expressing himself through us. And if we allow God, just allow God to express himself through us, he'll show us so much beauty, so much peace. And so that's the thing about the silence. You can't really put it into words. I mean, everything I've read from the beginning that goes back, I don't care who it is, Buddha, Krishna, Jesus, everyone, they all talk about that inner, there's something that's inside. And I think, you know, that's what it is, just connecting with that.
Thank you. Maybe one more question for Ray, and then I'm going to read a couple comments before we turn it back over to Father George. Ray, someone asked a very simple question and a very good question. I think it's on people's minds. How often does one do this? How often, if one wanted to do centering prayer in your day-to-day life?
Every day, I think is recommended. But, you know, honestly, Jim, the problem with making a recommendation like that, at least for prisoners, which is the population base I know, if you say you should really do it every day, and they're conscientious, and for whatever reason they don't do it every day, they really think that they're failing. And so I try not to suggest how often it should be done. You know, the second thing is that when you're angry or resentful and all the kinds of pretty normal emotions that you have in an incarcerated situation, oftentimes the mistake is you think you should not do centering prayer, and that's exactly when you can. The whole notion of simply releasing the thoughts and creating a space between yourself and the thought. You know, we have this wonderful ability, as you well know, to witness our thought, right? So there's this space between who we are witnessing and the thought, and that's the space that people can get into. And after you recognize that you have that space, you want to go there all the time, particularly if you're in impasse or conflict or whatever, because as Lawrence said earlier, you go in there and you get a different sense of yourself. So I think a person should do it as often as they're drawn to do it. And I know that's a vague answer, but in the long term, it's the most satisfying experience.
Yeah, and it's a very personal answer, and it depends on where you are in your life and, you know, how God takes you. Before we turn it back to Father George, I just want to read some wonderful comments. First to Lawrence and Artist and Paul. I am so appreciative that you gentlemen are so willing to share your experiences. It's so moving, and I feel better for having heard your words. And then two lovely things from Mary. Mary, congratulations to you and everyone involved in making such an inspiring film. And to Mary and Ray, Mary, this is an incredible ministry and film. I'm inspired and uplifted by these men, by Ray and you. Thank you for sharing your gift of film with us. And finally for Ray, which it really struck me too. I love that term, the spirituality of the incarcerated. Never thought of that before. Thank you all to you. And there just many, many thanks. So I want to just thank Lawrence and Artist and Mary and Paul and Ray, just to come to get to know you in this brief time, and for sharing your stories, for sharing this beautiful film, Mary, for sharing your ministry. And I just want to say, God bless you all and thank you. And now I'll turn it, you're welcome. And I'll turn it back to Father George.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jim, for your wonderful facilitating of this incredibly moving conversation. And I just want to say that, especially, let's see, Artist, I feel as though in a way the prophecy about you was fulfilled in our presence tonight. I mean, I think you really reveal your pastor side, and I hope that God blesses you with that opportunity to continue reaching out to people in ministry. You've all ministered to us tonight. Lawrence and Paul, thank you so much for what you've done, and I think really for who you are. I know what the place was like that you were in and what you went through. And we know so many men and women have been through the experience that you went through and are broken by it. So you represent triumph of the Spirit over everything that's been thrown in your way. So thank you so much for inspiring us with your lives, your presence tonight. It's a real gift to us. Ray and Mary, thank you for making this possible for us. And Lawrence, did you have something you wanted to say?
It's a thing I wanted to add. Prison contemplative outreach is starting a center in prayer class for those formerly incarcerated. And I don't know the link, but I know a person that's out there watching. Her name is Chandra Hansen. She'll be able to give you the details. And we're having our first meeting this Sunday. So anybody that wants to participate, get in contact.
Thank you. And we'll make sure we get that link out to everyone who's attending tonight. So a recording of tonight's program is going to be made available on our Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition YouTube page and via our website as well. Here's some information for you. We're also going to be including in the link to the Holding Still Resources Guide. There's a survey which we would encourage all of you to complete. It really would help us following this program. We're going to be having a CPMC follow-up town hall meeting on the practice of contemplative prayer, October 28th. That's at 1 p.m. Eastern time, and you can register on our website. And again, our thanks to Jim Martin for your presence and your time with us tonight, for Ray Leonardi and the Prison Contemplative Fellowship, for Mary Trunk and all of your associates who produced this wonderful film, and all the men who were part of this film as well, those who were with us tonight with Paul, Lawrence, and Artist, and all you others, Greg, Tyrone, Eddie, V, Frank, Edward. Thank you so much for your powerful witness here. We'd like to thank our donors, our sponsor, Catholic Charities USA, for tonight's program, and all the people who have worked so hard for the past couple months to bring this program about. Now, if you'd like to continue to support the work of Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition and the Prison Contemplative Fellowship, here are the contact information. We're always open for donations and support. And for more information, please also visit our websites. Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition has a huge body of resources for jail and prison ministry around the country. And if you're not familiar with it, please check it out. And of course, you can refer to the Prison Contemplative Fellowship website for more information on centering prayer. Again, please take a moment to fill out the survey before you go. And thank you so much for being part of tonight's webinar. I'd like to close with another prayer. This is actually from our Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition website. It's called A Prayer to Mary, Mother of Captives. And there's a corresponding beautiful icon that was done for us by, this is John Pollock, who does these icons, but this is the prayer. Mary, Mother of Captives, give us your compassion for those in prison. Mend in mercy the broken in mind and memory. Soften the hard of heart, the captives of anger. Free the innocent, parole the trustworthy. Awaken the repentance that restores hope. May prisoners' families persevere in their love. And we ask Jesus to heal the victims of crime. They live with the scars, and lift to eternal peace those who die. Grant to the victims' families the forgiveness that heals. Give wisdom to lawmakers and those who judge. Instill prudence and patience to those who guard. And make all of those in prison ministry bearers of your light, for all of us are in need of your mercy. Amen. So God bless you all, and wish you all a good night.